Let me share a moment that left me utterly perplexed and changed how I see certain situations. It started like any ordinary day, calm and predictable, but took a surprising turn I never expected. Before I begin, I hope you'll hear me out without judgment. I'm human after all, prone to emotions and moments of vulnerability. It was a warm, sunny morning. I had the house to myself. My husband was at work and the kids were at school. I dove into my usual routine of tidying up, organizing and sweeping. Cleaning is my little escape, almost therapeutic, especially when I can turn up the music and let it carry me through the day. That morning, upbeat melodies filled every corner of the house, and I was completely immersed in the rhythm, dancing a little as I worked. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow across the floor. I was so lost in the moment that I didn't even hear the doorbell ring. What I didn't realize was that Miles, one of my husband's friends, had stopped by to return a lawnmower he'd borrowed. When I didn't answer the door, he decided to leave it in the backyard. As he walked past the dining room window, he saw me cleaning and dancing, completely unaware of his presence. Apparently, he paused. He watched for a moment, perhaps intrigued or just caught off guard by the sight of someone who seemed so reserved, letting go so freely. I didn't notice him right away, and he stood there, quietly observing. When I finally caught sight of him, my heart jumped, and an instant rush of adrenaline took over. My first reaction was sheer panic. Though I was dressed casually in light clothes suited for housework, I felt exposed and vulnerable, like he had seen a part of me I usually keep private. Quickly, I threw on a nightgown and hurried out to the backyard where he was standing next to the lawnmower. "Miles, what were you doing at the window?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice shook slightly. He smiled, a bit awkwardly, and explained that he'd rung the bell several times but didn't get an answer. He decided to leave the mower in the backyard and, noticing movement inside, got curious. He claimed he wanted to make sure everything was okay and that it wasn't an intruder. His explanation made sense, but something in the way he looked at me unsettled me. Trying to break the awkwardness, I joked, "You looked like a burglar peeking in through the window." Miles laughed, but it was a nervous chuckle, as if he was masking some discomfort of his own. Then he suggested we grab a drink to cool off since the heat that morning was particularly oppressive. And that's how an ordinary day suddenly shifted into something I've been reflecting on ever since. The moment Miles left, I found myself standing there, trying to process what had just unfolded. Everything felt surreal, as though I was caught in a story I couldn't believe was mine. After inviting him in for a drink, I handed him a glass of orange juice, hoping to calm the unease that lingered in the air. He sat on the couch, wearing that same slightly unsettled smile, and as he sipped, his words caught me off guard. "You're so different from what I imagined," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and admiration. "So relaxed, so carefree." His compliments left me stunned. I wasn't used to being seen in this way, let alone by someone so close to my husband. I tried to brush it off, laughing nervously and telling him he was exaggerating, but Miles wouldn't let it go. He insisted there was something captivating about that morning, about the way I moved. His words left me on edge, though I couldn't entirely deny the curiosity they stirred. A voice in my head screamed at me to shut down the conversation, to step away from this dangerous path. Yet, an unfamiliar sensation kept me rooted in place, a mixture of intrigue and unease. When Miles finally rose to leave, I noticed his agitation. The tension between us was almost palpable, and it left me feeling equally unnerved and strangely exhilarated. And then it happened. Miles leaned in closer, and for a moment, the space between us seemed to vanish. I froze, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. My thoughts swirled in confusion, caught between shock and an unexpected rush of emotion that I couldn't quite name. As reality rushed back, guilt hit me like a tidal wave. How could I have let this happen? Miles seemed just as shaken. He immediately apologized, his voice trembling, and even knelt in front of me, pleading for forgiveness. I sat in stunned silence, not knowing what to say. To ease the suffocating tension, I impulsively offered him a bracelet from my childhood, a small, symbolic gesture of reconciliation. He accepted it with a faint smile, and for a moment the tension between us softened. We sat back down on the couch, our emotions in turmoil but unspoken. Time seemed to stand still, and in that fleeting moment, everything felt both impossibly wrong and undeniably real. The world beyond that room ceased to exist, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. A spark, a connection, a glimpse of a part of myself I'd buried long ago. When Miles finally stood to leave, I felt a strange mix of relief and regret. We hugged briefly, and as he walked out the door, an unsettling realization hit me. This day had changed something inside me. It was as if a locked door had been thrown open, and now there was no going back. After he left, the house felt different. The music that had once filled the room with joy now seemed distant, echoing faintly like a memory of a simpler time. I sat alone on the couch, replaying everything in my mind, the weight of my guilt pressing down on me like a storm cloud. The memory of that moment with Miles wouldn't leave me, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. What have I done? I whispered to myself, the enormity of the moment sinking in. I looked around, searching for some semblance of normalcy in the familiar clutter of the house, but nothing felt the same. It was as if the entire world had shifted, and I was left to navigate a path I never intended to take. Even as guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't ignore the other emotions stirring within, the thrill of having been seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't experienced before. It was as though a dormant part of me had come to life, and now that it was awake, it refused to be silenced. That realization scared me, but it also left me longing for something I couldn't quite define. The rest of the day passed in a haze, my thoughts circling back to Miles's kiss and the emotions it stirred. I knew I was standing at a crossroads, teetering between the life I'd always known and the pull of something unknown but undeniably powerful. And as much as I tried to push the memory away, it lingered, an undeniable mark on a day I would never forget. In the days that followed, I was a swirl of conflicting emotions. Guilt clung to me like a shadow, but intertwined with it was an undeniable spark of excitement, a strange, disconcerting feeling that left me questioning everything. I found myself obsessively replaying the moment with Miles in my mind, searching for explanations, excuses, or anything that might help me make sense of what had happened. It was just the heat, I told myself, the music, the loneliness. But deep down, I knew those were just feeble justifications. What occurred between Miles and me wasn't a fleeting accident. It was the culmination of something that had been quietly brewing beneath the surface, invisible but undeniable. For a fleeting moment, I thought about coming clean to my husband, confessing everything. But the thought alone made my stomach twist in fear. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I destroy the trust we'd built, knowing it would forever change the way he saw me? The thought of shattering the life we shared was too much to bear. So I buried it. I forced myself back into the routines of daily life, cleaning, caring for the kids, and greeting my husband with a smile as though nothing had changed. But inside, I felt as if I was carrying a wound, one that pulsed painfully with every memory of that kiss. I avoided Miles at all costs. Whenever he visited my husband, I found excuses to stay busy, retreating into the safety of another room or leaving the house altogether. Miles seemed to understand. He kept his distance, respecting the unspoken boundary I had set. And yet, even without speaking, there was an undeniable tension between us. It lingered in the air like an uninvited guest, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Each time our eyes met briefly, it was as if we were silently acknowledging that something had shifted irreversibly. As time passed, I began to question myself even more. Could it be that what happened with Miles had awakened something that my marriage hadn't in years? I loved my husband deeply. Of that there was no doubt. But somewhere along the way, our life together had become predictable, mechanical. The spontaneity, the spark, had faded without either of us noticing. Miles, with his carefree demeanor, had somehow uncovered an emotional void I hadn't even realized was there. And now I couldn't ignore it. The war inside me continued, guilt battling desire, love conflicting with longing. I knew that pursuing anything further with Miles would mean betraying everything my husband and I had built together, jeopardizing the stability of our family. But the thought of simply returning to my old life, pretending none of this had ever happened, felt suffocating. Was there a way to reconcile these two sides of myself? To stay loyal and responsible, but also find space for this new awakening? The question haunted me day and night. One evening during dinner, my husband casually brought up Miles. He mentioned how cheerful Miles had seemed the last time they spoke, even saying that he'd mentioned how much fun he'd had during his visit. My heart nearly stopped. I forced a laugh, hoping it sounded natural, and brushed off the comment, but inside I was unraveling. Just hearing Miles's name was enough to flood me with memories, with feelings I was desperately trying to suppress. After that dinner, I knew I couldn't keep ignoring this. I needed answers. What did Miles really represent? Was he just a temporary distraction, a fleeting physical attraction born out of loneliness? Or was there something deeper, something I was afraid to admit even to myself? A few days later, determined to confront my own feelings, I resolved to figure it out. Whatever path I chose, I couldn't keep living with this internal chaos. Something had to give. Determined to confront the storm swirling inside me, I decided to seek out Miles. I knew it was a reckless choice, that I was dangerously close to crossing a line I could never uncross, but I needed clarity. I had to face him to understand why that moment between us had affected me so deeply. I found him at a small coffee shop he frequented on weekends. When he spotted me walking in, his eyes widened in surprise, but soon that familiar smile, the one that made me uneasy and intrigued all at once, spread across his face. I gestured toward a quiet corner table, away from the curious eyes of the other patrons. For a while we just sat there, surrounded by the low hum of the cafe. Neither of us knew how to start. I nervously traced the rim of my coffee cup, stealing glances at Miles, who watched me with a quiet intensity. Finally he broke the silence. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, tinged with concern. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Miles, we need to talk about what happened that day." He nodded, as if he'd been expecting this conversation. "I know it was unexpected," he began. "And I don't want you to think I was trying to." Before he could finish, I cut him off. "No, Miles. I'm not here to blame you. I need to understand what it meant. For me. For you." He fell silent for a moment. His brow furrowed as he chose his words carefully. "To be honest, I don't know exactly what to say. That day caught me off guard, and I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. I didn't mean to create this tension between us." His confession hit me harder than I expected. Deep down, I knew there was more to what had happened, something that wasn't purely physical. Hearing Miles's honesty only made the situation more complicated. "I've been thinking about it a lot too," I admitted. "But we can't. This can't continue. Have a family, Miles. A husband. I can't just throw all of that away." He nodded again, his expression heavy with understanding. "No. And I respect that. I don't want to be the reason anything falls apart for you. But at the same time, I can't ignore what I feel." The weight of those words pressed down on both of us. We sat there, surrounded by the clinking of cups and quiet conversations, but the world felt far away. The reality was clear. Whatever had happened that day was a mistake, one we couldn't afford to repeat. In that quiet corner, we both silently agreed to step back and leave the moment behind. As much as it hurt, we both knew the only solution was to walk away. I had to focus on my family and my marriage, and Miles needed to move forward with his own life. The conversation, though painful, brought a sense of closure. When I left the coffee shop, I felt a bittersweet peace settle over me. It was as though we had finally closed a chapter that needed to be finished. Returning to my daily life wasn't easy. Memories of that day with Miles lingered like faint echoes in the back of my mind. Little by little, I worked to bury them, to focus on what truly mattered: my family, my husband, and the life we had built together. I put my energy into rediscovering the connection that had brought my husband and me together in the first place. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to rebuild the bond between us, to find joy in the simplicity of our life as partners. Still, no matter how much time passed, that sunny morning with Miles remained etched in my memory. It wasn't something I could erase, but I learned to see it for what it was: a fleeting moment that revealed a part of me I hadn't acknowledged before. A reminder of my own humanity, my vulnerability, and the importance of the choices I make. That chapter of my life is now closed, but I carry it with me, tucked away in a quiet corner of my heart. Not as a regret, but as a lesson. Sometimes the most intense emotions are the ones we must leave behind to protect what truly matters.